So the last section was really a demonstration that we don't find this easy. That's an understatement. But this is the reason why the whole issue requires education and reflection. And I just said that just now that if that isn't a lesson in why we don't need education and how complex some of this stuff is, I don't know what is, frankly. It appears that the whole of humanity is engaged in, I suppose, what you could describe it as a kind of massive exercise of evolution. That's what we're in it. That's what we're involved in. Yeah, it's an evolutionary change in humanity. It's an evolution of the psyche, the intellect, the emotions, internal honesty, which is all part of that, really. And this business that we're dealing with right now, which is dealing with these internal difficulties in the psyche, is part of our evolutionary change and part of the evolutionary challenge that we have to overcome. Yeah, so these impediments to our clarity, clarity of truth, our ability to face truth when it's difficult, that is part of the evolution that I think that we have to engage in. That's what we're on the journey of, if you like. And it's all about coming to recognize how we think. There's a kind of self-analysis involved, in a kind of a meta-analysis involved in how we observe things, how we think, the conclusions that we come to, all of this, how we make decisions. It's all about consciousness. Yeah, and consciousness is one of those words, that's kind of associated often with a sort of like hippie stuff. We all attend kind of summer events where we listen to some nice music and sit around and get a bit huggy about things, and that actually might be quite good. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do some of that too, but this is the hard stuff needs to be done as well, which is examining and analyzing our thinking patterns. Yeah, stripping out our encumbrances and impediments. That's really what they are. So, feelings and emotions from hidden trauma is one of the things that triggers this. We've all had traumas in our childhood, sometimes in adulthood as well, and sometimes things set those off. Yeah, and we take actions on the basis of those things sometimes as well. We don't know where those emotions sometimes come from. Unconscious behavior causes pain and confusion to yourself and others around you as well. So unless we examine these things and we get into those things, we're not going to solve those issues. Is this, in fact, the most dangerous component to a society? Unconscious behavior, not examining unconscious behavior. So things that get suppressed. Okay, and we call that the shadow. So we're looking here at the most famous figure who did the work on the shadow work. On shadow work was Carl Jung. Okay, and doing shadow work puts you in reality by removing all tendencies to be in denial. Being in denial is being unaware, unconscious. Yeah. So therefore, shadow work is all about making oneself fully aware. What does he have to say about it? One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. Yeah, it empowers you to be in your free will. Yeah, when you do that work, and that could be all sorts of things. Yeah, re-owning your talents that have been discouraged by an overbearing parent, for example. Resetting your original destiny, removing layers of programming. There's all sorts of things there. I'm not going to get into too much of that. Yeah. That's the goal, is understanding those goals and stepping over them, learning to get over those. So the internal honesty that I'm talking about here leads us to a clearer thinking and an ability to align with truth. That's what it's all about. And that in turn leads us to greater responsibility and trustworthiness. That's ultimately where it's taking us. Yeah, if we start stripping away these any kind of internal dishonesties about things, if we take those out, if we strip those away and change and burn those off, if you like, then we start to become more trustworthy to other people. Yeah, and more importantly, you could say, is that we become more trustworthy to ourselves. We become more authentic. We become more genuine. That's how we do it. Yeah, re-owning of yourself, removing the fake personalities and personas that you have adopted over time, all those masks that you put on, different versions of yourself. Yeah, we all do it. So it allows you to become authentic and raw rather than a fake version of yourself. Yeah, and this in turn leads to kind of feedback loops of satisfaction and fulfillment. Why? Because I can now live with myself. Yeah, that's the key. If you finding that you can't live with yourself, there's a kind of internal dislike of yourself. Well, why is that? Are you kind of lying to yourself in some way, perhaps? And this is about governing ourselves responsibly, and how when we do that, we kind of come to know it. We come to recognize that we're governing ourselves properly, which then has those positive feedback loops. And this is about, if you, for example, if you say what you're going to do and then you do it, you're proving to be reliable to other people. Yeah, people learn to take you at your word. Your word is good, and people notice it. If you can't trust yourself because you see yourself lying, or you spot those behaviors internally, which are letting yourself down, then that in turn generates a kind of shame or even a self-hatred. So the shadow, dark aspects, repressed due to feelings of fear, shame, anger, and expectation. And the worst of it is shadow in its most solid and calcified form can be quite primal and impulsive. Yeah, this is what goes wrong. It's what becomes more negative if we don't do these things. There's a disconnect because your conscience is highlighting that what you chose to do is not what you really know to be right. Inside, your thoughts, feelings, and actions are not in alignment. In other words, there are internal contradictions. Yeah, thoughts, feelings, and actions, and this is the Trinity at the esoteric level. Yeah, the more hidden in the mystery traditions, we would call that the Trinity. The thoughts, feelings, and actions are not in alignment. And so therefore there's internal fragmentation. Yeah, you're out of control. That's the thing. If you're internally fragmented and you're not in alignment, there are contradictions between your thoughts and the way you feel about things and then the actions that you take. If you're fragmented like that, it means you're not in control of yourself, and you know it as well. You will know that. So all of this is about self-improvement. Yeah, this is not just your average kind of business course on self-improvement. And although some of those might be really good, I would say that the ultimate self-improvement course is the study of natural law and the human psyche. Which I probably, a lot of those courses actually, they might be kind of like getting quite close to. I don't know. But if you really want the ultimate self-improvement stuff, it's this. Yeah, so that self-improvement aligns with the natural state. That's what we're really saying. So, next section is about health. So now we can start linking things to our healthy condition, the healthy condition of man. So this begins to demonstrate that health equates to aligning with truth, and health equates to freedom. See, that's natural law at work right there. Yeah, that the natural condition is favoring our health, is propping up a healthy condition of humanity. The freedom to make good choices of our own creates a healthy condition psychologically, emotionally, and even physiologically. What do we mean by physiologically? You feel it in the physiology. Yeah, when you are satisfied with yourself, you feel fulfilled because you're being honest and truthful and you're authentic and you're conducting yourself honorably. Yeah, you feel that in the physiology. So it makes you feel healthier physically. So a lack of health is perhaps we could say is usually connected to some kind of internal turmoil in some way, a denial of the self, contradictions, lies, internal lies, or not being able to make those choices in some way. Being forced to go along with something that we might not agree with. Yeah, that's not good. We don't want a condition where that's the case. Something going along with something that you know to be wrong. So there's an interesting, relatively new area of study, which I didn't know about until very recently, called moral injury. Look it up. It's very interesting, but it's all about those kinds of, it's recognized in therapy as as you know, where people have been in situations where they've been forced maybe to go along with something in their work that they didn't agree with. And it's very related to what we're talking about here. There's a very interesting book by a gentleman in America called Clay Conrad, called Jury Nullification. And there was a good example in there where he was explaining where the jury were in tears because they thought they had to go against their conscience. Quite interesting. And we knew, of course, during the years 2020 when things went a bit crazy and a bit chaotic, that masking was wrong. Right? People wearing masks was a terribly wrong thing to do. Yeah, but people did it anyway. They went along with it. And I noticed actually, I mean, I never did. I didn't once wear a mask. Absolutely refused to do it. And I remember just finding it difficult to talk to people who were masked up. And I noticed in having conversations with people who were either masked up, currently they were still had their mask on, or those that previously had, but I'd managed to persuade them to take it off or whatever it was, couldn't make eye contact due to a kind of, I think, probably an internal shame. It's all part of it. So doing things contrary to conscience is what we're talking about here, being coerced into a decision that is contrary to what you know to be right. And it's again about internal conflict in the Trinity, thoughts, feelings, and actions being out of alignment. The natural state wills us into the state of health. It wants us to be free because we're invented like that. The natural order has created the human being in such a way that if you deny the natural ways of functioning, which is choice, then you are creating a condition of lack of health, essentially. There you go. There's the evidence, right? It's interesting stuff, isn't it? So, this next section, clarity on the nature of wrongdoing. So, a study of this material causes us to recognize that wrongdoing is entirely and solely concerned with the transgressing of those boundaries, removing another's choices, exercising our free will beyond the point that would retain harmony between relationships and in our communities. So that is our value system. We're getting to the point of proving it logically there, that my rights end where another's begin. It's really all about retaining choice for all individuals. That's what it's about. So that's the golden rule. Do unto others that which you would wish done unto you. But clearer than that, as I've often said, is to put it into the apophatic, which is the negative. Do not do unto others that which you would wish not done unto you. There's an extra clarity that's produced when you put it into the apophatic like that. And this is all to do with a connectedness between individuals. If I hurt the other, then I'm hurting myself. Yeah, even back to Immanuel Kant, who was saying that as well, further back. Although the natural justice principle is easy to understand and sounds straightforward on the surface, it is sometimes subtle, complex, and difficult to conclude wrongdoing or not. Yeah, this is about moral conundrums. They're not always clear, not always easy to discover, which is again why we need an education, right? Often we are not adhering to this principle in ways we don't notice due to our subconscious, not calling things out. How do we call out wrongdoing? What about politicians suggesting something utterly reprehensible, like the removal of trial by jury, which is going on right now? Well, the answer is not defeat him at the next election with your politics.
Let's be clear. That's not how you do it. You call it out because it's immoral, because it's a crime. That's what you do. Yeah, it's a lack of clarity, and that's what we've noticed over the last few days, few weeks, if you like, that the attempts and the efforts on the part of some within the Labour Party at the moment, it's not them only. Let's make that absolutely clear. Okay, a lot of stuff has been put in the has been laid down in the way of foundations on all sides of politics for this one. Okay, but it's about being clear that you don't. It's not morally relative, by the way, because removing trial by jury is removing people's equity and choice. It's removing people's ownership and self-determination as well. The people own the law. The people retain ownership of their justice system. Yeah, and without trial by jury, that doesn't happen. And yet we've had almost silence from an awful lot of people. Nothing at all. Yeah, remaining silent over things that you shouldn't be. For that reason, and for the reasons given earlier regarding the human psyche, we have to be careful about judging wrongdoing. Although difficult, it must be called out in society and not excused or brushed under the carpet. But doing this, that is being clear and calling out wrongdoing, requires care, which is why in the judgment of crime, we need many people, a jury, not a single judge. And you cannot be the judge in your own cause. Anarchists.
So raw anarchy is potentially dangerous as it's a free for all in a realm in which humans are still learning. Humans must not take the law into their own hands. It's dangerous. What if you get it wrong? Yeah. If we are to be in judgment upon each other, we need a common sense arrangement for it. A natural law tribunal, trial by jury, and our constitution, which is why I talk about it.
So, self-rulership, this is what this is about. This is about responsibility and self-management, which is what I've already discussed. Humans do not learn to be responsible unless they have the opportunity to practice that. Okay, hence the need for us to make our choices, but sensibly and with care and a sense of responsibility. So this is why punishment under legislation from government that isn't checked through the conscience of a jury will deliver injustice, not justice. Always must be. And then we're on to the sort of what I would call the feedback loops from our truth aligned choices. Yeah, those choices that we make that are aligned with the golden rule. Yeah, if we align ourselves, what are the effects of that? Well, so to return once more to the nature of man for a moment, making good choices that align with truth or the golden rule causes us to recognize our own increasing health and forward direction. It creates encouragement and uplift in our condition. It generates satisfaction and a sense of fulfillment in the individual. And this in turn causes us to rise in confidence, rise in stature, and rise in self-esteem. My rights end where another's begin. Okay, you can see how the connection between health, you are more human, you are more true to your humanity when you're healthy. And in turn, you're more true to your humanity, therefore, when you are aligning with truth and you're acting morally according to the golden rule. It's quite important conclusions that we're drawing here, but it's coming to these conclusions and understanding the logic underneath it and the arguments for it. Yeah, the reasoning behind it. That's the important thing. Yes, we can do this through conscience as well, but we've got to remember and bear in mind that our conscience needs to be checked all the time. We need to check our underlying principles. Yeah, and that means we have to look at logic and reason really carefully as well. So what about denying self-governance? And what I'm saying here is that denying self-governance is a denial of humanity. So humans can get it wrong, yeah, through faulty perception, but we have to have that opportunity to make those mistakes. That means that there is risk. And denying humans the opportunity to get things wrong, the possibility of getting things wrong, and therefore to commit an immorality, which is going to happen. But the denying of humans the opportunity to do that is itself evil under natural law. Yeah, that possibility of things going wrong must remain. We hope that it won't happen too much. But what I suppose I'm saying is that in continuing to allow, to an extent, people to make those mistakes, is what is ultimately going to cause self-governance to emerge, right? Usually, and with practice, humans will begin to see the impending or approaching error or trap that they're going to fall into and act quickly enough to avoid it. But that only so in other words, it's not inevitable. You don't say, right, let's all just make mistakes. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that in you having the possibility, the full possibility that you could fall into a trap and make a big mistake is the thing that most effectively prevents you from doing it. Without this risk and possibility, we deny the possibility of human evolution and healing. We're not allowing ourselves to learn the lessons and to catalyze and propel ourselves forward in that forward direction and that uplift that we need. Yeah, if you just keep putting in place orders that we then have to follow through coercion and threats, then that doesn't work. That doesn't propel humanity forward into a condition of health. Attempting to prevent bad outcomes through brute force, coercion, and legislation is denying that organic evolution, and it denies the opportunity for lessons to be learned. And I gave an example of this when I had a discussion with Claire Wills Harrison on this, and I think at the end of it, I used the example of my example of the family-run hotel, which is this, the prejudiced family that runs a hotel, right? They're kind of anti-gay. They don't like foreigners. I don't know, whatever it is, right? And they don't allow, let's say that they don't allow gay people to stay at their hotel or something, right? Do you pass a piece of legislation to say that, no, you're not allowed to do that. You can't do that. And a lot of people would still say, well, yeah, that would be the right thing to do. Is that? Or is there a deeper principle that you're creating a deeper injustice there, which is removing choice? Okay, so what ultimately should be happening there, of course, if you understand, if you're being coherent with natural law, is that you don't do that. You just allow things to unfold. What ultimately will happen, and the best lessons that will be learned, will ultimately be that other people just won't they won't go there, they won't stay there. Other people who aren't gay might decide, well, I'm not going to go and stay there either because I don't agree with that. In other words, what I'm saying, I suppose, is that the lessons of life have to be learnt naturally. Yeah, you don't put a sticking plaster over the problem, because in a way what you're doing is you're kind of denying the lesson learning opportunity. You're just saying, no, here's a rule. You don't even have to think about the underlying morality of it. Yeah, we're gonna suppress it. And in a way, that's what legislation does, is that it's like taking a kind of pharmaceutical medicine that just suppresses the pain a little bit, or the surface problem, just gets rid of it, makes you temporarily feel a bit better, maybe. Yeah, but it's not dealing with the underneath. Yeah, it's not dealing with the shadow, the deep stuff. So denying humans the opportunity to make choices in order to learn is itself a wrongdoing and an injustice. A society in which people are in fear and must simply follow orders, legislation, without using their internal faculties, so what I talked about at the beginning, is spiritually immature and regressive. That's pretty hard to, that's hard talk, isn't it? That a society that is heavily legislated, whether its law system, its justice system, contains a huge amount of legislation, is spiritually immature and regressive. There's a sign right there of a society that's going backwards, not forwards.
Individualism and collectivism. Look at the left-hand side compared with the right-hand side. Individualism is about non-coercion, voluntarist. It's about free speech, free thinking, no taxation, no government, essentially. Why? Because the people are the government through the jury. It's about self-mastery. Collectivism, on the other hand, is about force and coercion. It's about limited or no free speech. It's about thought and mind control. Because if you limit speech, you could say, well, actually, that kind of controls the way you think as well. Taxation, government authority, it's about a slave mentality. If we break that down even further, you could say that individualism is about self-control, self-governance, responsibility, alignment with nature, and trustworthiness. And there are loads more that we could put in there, but that's a nice bundle of things, isn't it? Whereas collectivism is you're out of control. You've got a tyrant or slave expression going on because the slaves are the ones who are following orders, and the tyrant is the master in that situation. Yeah, whereas we should be in the center as individuals. That's what we mean by individualism, the Christ. Denial of self. Yeah, it's irresponsible, conflict with nature, and it's untrustworthy.
And we learned this, didn't we, at Nuremberg? You know, that just following orders is not acceptable. It is not virtuous simply to do what you're told. Just going along with what, you know, everybody, what the consensus thinks, or what's become normalized. You know, if you've learned nothing else from this video, is that, you know, we really do need to check our moral compass always for ourselves, not by just following orders. Yeah, and following legislation in society is like that. It's order following.
Psychological maturity. This is an interesting one. The test of the psychologically mature person, and therefore spiritually aware, will be found in his or her capacity to handle what we might call the triple A's: anxiety, ambiguity, and ambivalence. While all of us suffer these onslaughts and react reflexively, the immature psyche especially suffers a tension and seeks to resolve it quickly by shifting right or left to a one-sided solution. The more mature psyche is able to sustain the tension of opposites and contain conflict longer, thereby allowing the developmental and revelatory potential of the issue to emerge. Anxiety rises in the face of uncertainty, open-endedness. Ambiguity confounds the ego's lust for security to fix the world in a permanently knowable place. Ambivalence, the fact that the opposites are always present, visible or not, obliges one to deal with the capacity for dialogue with the other. This experience often obliges a confrontation with the shadow. James Hollis in Creating a Life.
But a society that promotes self-governance, is spiritually mature and more enlightened. Our humanity depends upon us self-governing, taking responsibility. Yeah, and Alexis de Tocqueville said this on Trial by Jury. Let me just quote what he said. The jury, quote, is both the most effective way of establishing the people's rule and the most efficient way of teaching them to rule. See, what he's meaning there is to rule themselves. And he goes on, okay, de Tocqueville, he also described the jury as, quote, a political institution embodying the sovereignty of the people, end quote, and, quote, the very best way of preparing a people to be free. Jury trial. That's the best way to prepare a people to be free. Okay, and that's a painful thing to reflect on right now, isn't it? Given the fact that we now have efforts in our political class at the moment to remove trial by jury. Right, and interestingly, though, most of the biggest and most passionate efforts in defense of trial by jury and the principles of that have not come from the liberty-leaning communities, but more from the mainstream world, actually, because they have spotted that that's a real problem. It's just that they don't quite have the grounding and the understanding of where that comes from. They think that the solution to that then is to just take it back through the political process again and vote in another party that hopefully will reverse that. But no way. So the universe self-evidently regards the need for man to be free and to make his own choices as more important even than preventing any problems that might come from that. Right? There's the conclusion. Right? The universe itself wants choice. Most of all. So here's a quotation from Frederick Bastiat. Oh, I did say at the beginning that I would. There it is. Frederick Bastiat, The Law. A true individualist. Yeah, he didn't understand the solution. And interestingly, he wrote this essay called The Law in 1850. And it was only 2 years later, in 1852, that Lysander Spooner wrote his essay Trial by Jury, which was the answer. I mean, I don't know whether it was intentionally. It might not have been. I don't suspect they necessarily knew each other. Lysander Spooner was a lawyer in America. Frederick Bastiat was in France. Yeah, so, but they were both in a way talking about the two things, the French Revolution in 1789 and the American Declaration of Independence in 1776, wasn't it? Yeah, so all happening at the same time. And we also got Edmund Burke writing Reflections in 1790, and we'd got Tom Paine writing The Rights of Man in 1791. Most of these commentators didn't understand what ultimately was needed, but they hadn't really figured out the Enlightenment hadn't really got it right. They hadn't understood individualism at that point, but he had understood it, but didn't know what the solution was. Lysander Spooner in Trial by Jury absolutely did understand it and was kind of giving the answer 2 years later in his essay on Trial by Jury, which is great. Anyway, this is Frederick Bastiat from The Law. But when the law, through the medium of its necessary agent, force, imposes a form of labour, a method or a subject of instruction, a creed or a worship, it is no longer negative. It acts positively upon men, meaning not in a good way. It means by force is what he means. It substitutes the will of the legislator for their own will, the initiative of the legislator for their own initiative. They have no need, this is the people, to consult, to compare, or to foresee. The law does all of that for them, meaning the legislation is what he's meaning. It's forcing all of this upon their own faculties. It's substituting their faculties for this. He carries on. The intellect is for them a useless encumbrance. They cease to be men. They lose their personality, their liberty, their property. Frederick Bastiat. There it is. So, in conclusion, denying man his freedom to exercise his faculties is to deny his dignity and his humanity. So, moving on, we're nearly there now. We're nearly finished. We're just getting to those conclusions now, the more positive point. So, natural state for humans. What is the natural condition for humanity? It's self-governance. That is the natural state. The natural order wills that to us. It is self-evident that the natural order favours self-governance and man being free to make choices in order to encourage growth, evolution, and uplift. Cause and effect teaches us this. The nature of man teaches us this.
So final thoughts. Freedom requires spiritual maturity in the celestial jungle. Wow. Okay, that means what we're really saying there is that the universe is a wild place and that God wishes us to learn lessons.
Humans recognizing that morality is objective is a requirement of the natural order. Right? So to be in alignment with natural order, with natural law itself, requires you to come to understand that morality is at some level objective. It doesn't mean to say that it's all really clear, it's all codified for you in the sky. It doesn't mean that, right? But what it means is that there are certain patterns, there are certain absolutes in morality. Okay, and what those are simply, my rights end where another's begin. Don't remove another's choices. And in the collective, we're going to start drawing more conclusions as to how that should operate. Okay, it means, again, don't remove people's choices. Don't legislate from the center. Humans recognizing for themselves precisely what is moral and what is not is a requirement of the natural order. Self-governance. You've got to do it. You've got to come to know it and understand it. That means checking your principles all the time. The natural order, our universe or our reality, has contained within itself and its operating conditions clues and hints that it wishes self-improvement for man. You can see that through the way we're created, that self-governance is a requirement. In other words, that we need to be healthy. It's wanting us to be healthy and to self-improve. So there's an indication of God, if you like, if you're a believer in God, wanting humans to self-improve. So there's a requirement. Our individuality is a requirement. Individual rights is a requirement of the natural order. Can't argue with it. Yeah, you can go against it if you want to because you've got the free will to do so. But what are you going to get? Negative consequences, right? You have the freedom to ignore that, but what you don't have the freedom to do is to ignore it and still everything to be kind of cool and all right. Doesn't work like that, I'm afraid. The creator's wishes are actually observable. Individuality is favored by the creator. A rule of law and justice system must be based on objective values and morality. Do no harm, cause no loss, act in honor. And then the piece that I usually put on the end is call out wrongdoing. Don't sit on the sidelines, in other words, when wrongdoing is happening. It's got to be acknowledged. Yeah, it doesn't mean you crucify the individual necessarily. It means that it's got to be acknowledged. You've got to bring it to the surface. Our English law was based on the principle of the golden rule, which is really an expression of natural law. Yeah, that's it, basically. So the English law's common law is an existence within our practical world as a microcosm of natural law. It's a reflection of natural law, right? So is it man-made law? Not really. It's man-recognized law, right? It's man recognizing what actually has to be. Yeah, so it's not an invention of man. Yeah, but what it is in his moments of wisdom, of greater wisdom in recognizing what must be inevitabilities. Yeah, we hold these truths to be self-evident, as the founding fathers said. Yeah, that's what your common law is. Yeah, so people who are saying, oh, as soon as you use the word constitution, that's man-made law. No, it's not. If it's a legitimate constitution, it means that you're simply creating a legitimate framework that operates in alignment with natural law. That's not man-invented stuff. It's not artificial. It can be recognized and acknowledged by anyone without having to claim a particular religion, because it is the code of the creator. It's self-evident in our makeup and our natural order. There it is, objective morality.